All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Bethany Quinn. I am president of Golden Shovel Agency, and I'm really excited to have a fantastic group of panelists today that are going to help us all learn about ways that we can support local business transitions, how economic developers and community leaders can help to facilitate employee ownership sales. So joining us on the panel today, we have Sarah McBroom from Project Equity, Sam Brownell from Stratus Wealth Advisors, Mark Fick from Shared Capital, and Dawn Quinn from Quinn Patton. So just as an overview of what we're going to be covering today, we're going to be talking about different strategies and best practices to keep businesses in our local communities through facilitating the transition from a private owner to a company being owned by its employees. The reason why we want to do that is it helps us to sustain jobs, keep jobs in our community. Obviously, if a business is going to sell and they sell to someone who is outside of the area, there is no guarantee they are going to maintain their operations in your local community. That's a huge risk, a risk that economic developers and BR&E managers do not want to take. The other aspect of this is when we're able to transition companies to employee ownership, that spurs economic growth in adjacent businesses, whether that's with a financial planner or a marketing company that's local, or hiring another supplier and vendor as they expand. There is a ripple effect when we're able to keep these businesses local and make those transitions. Also, I hear all the time from economic developers, especially in rural communities, that these local businesses are critical, vital to their quality of life. I have heard so many stories, things like, this was the only local hardware store in town and now it's gone. And we wanted to keep it, but they didn't find a buyer, it's gone. And now people have to drive, or maybe a favorite restaurant or what have you. So when a local business goes away, it's not that you're just losing a service provider or product that could maybe be replaced by Amazon. You're losing a vital part of your community, and we don't want to see that happen. And of course, keeping them local creates growth opportunities as you continue to work to expand those businesses locally. And then finally, one of the big complaints I hear from economic developers almost on a daily basis is, how can Golden Shovel help people to understand what we do and the impact that we make on communities? As you guys know, things like infrastructure development and incentives, or bringing in stuff from the state, sometimes it's really nebulous and it's hard for people to wrap their hands around what you're doing on a daily basis. Helping to keep a company local and making it so that other community members can then own that company, that's tangible. That's a tangible success story, and definitely a way that you can help to highlight the impact that you're making. So that's why we're talking about this today. So let's get into it. All right, Sarah, you are up first. Could you maybe give people some background on Project Equity and what employee ownership is?
Sure. And thank you for having us. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Project Equity, we're a national nonprofit organization, and we exist to do a lot of what Bethany just described. We help business owners preserve their legacy and their business by transitioning to employee ownership. We also work with folks like yourselves, with economic developers, with business advisors, with local government and nonprofit, to understand employee ownership and how you can help us spread the word. When we talk about employee ownership at Project Equity, we mean broad ownership of a business by the folks that work there. It can be a way for an owner to sell their business, and it can also be a benefit to the local economy, to the community, and to workers.
That's great. So what are some of the common misconceptions that you hear regularly about business ownership from an employee perspective?
Yeah, there are several. First, I hear all the time, my workforce can't afford to buy my business. That's a common misconception when we talk about selling your business to your employees. Of course, you might assume that means my employees need to foot the bill. and buy that business. And the way that we structure employee ownership transitions with help from some of the folks on this call is through more of a leveraged buyout type structure, which we can get into that. But the headline there is that the employees are not having to pay out of pocket and take on the risk of financing the sale of the business. That's one of the beauties of this model, and why it's a great option for a lot of business owners. Another is my workforce can't run the business like I can. Does this mean that now every person is playing the role of manager of my business? And so we try and help owners understand that your management structure and your ownership structure and the governance of your business can be three different things, and you can maintain your management structure and decision making and different roles, and still have broad-based shared ownership. And the third is,
I'll stop you right there,
yeah,
Sarah, because that is a concern I know economic developers have expressed to me in the conversations with business owners, is that fear that their employees aren't ready.
right. We're here to help your employees understand this model and become ready and help the business thrive post-transition. And, your management transition plan is important in any kind of sale of your business. So it's something that we want owners to start thinking about early and getting folks ready to assume the different roles that may need to be filled. Um,
That brings
so
us to your
yeah.
services.
Yes. So Project Equity, we provide one-on-one advising to businesses throughout their employee ownership journey, which we divide into 4 steps. The first is if you just want to have a call about understanding this option and whether it fits your business 10 years down the road, we can provide that type of consultation, advising. You can schedule a call with our team if you're a business owner right now. And then if you want to go deeper and explore this more seriously, we can walk you through a feasibility assessment. We can help you through the entire transition to becoming an employee-owned business. And to the last point, we can support the business post-transition to make sure it thrives under the new ownership structure.
Great. So I did include a testimonial, an example of a company that they helped. I know Audrey always sends the slides out later. We won't play this now, but I just wanted to point this out to everyone who's here. If you want to see a perspective of people who went through the transition, you can play this video. But for now, Sarah, I wanted to have you explore a little further what the primary benefits are of transitioning to employee ownership, both from the business owner's perspective and the community.
Yeah, if folks leave the conversation today with anything, it's to the point you made earlier, Bethany, that there are real, legitimate, tangible business benefits for both the owner and the local economy and the workers. I worked in, like many, in state level economic development for 10 years early in my career, and became frustrated at times by the tools at my disposal to create, prosperity, and found employee ownership and went all in. So if you imagine a business owner, they poured their blood, sweat, and tears into this business. It's provided an income for them and their family. If they don't sell their business, they lose out on that wealth building opportunity, that retirement nest egg. And to the point Sam made earlier, that lots of owners don't have a lot of options. Businesses are transitioning less and less within families. They may not have a obvious buyer. And so that business is at risk of shutting down, and all the benefits to the workers community and the owner. So this provides the owner, first and foremost, a viable option to sell their business and see the benefits of that. At the same time, it provides meaningful wealth building opportunities for workers who may not have the opportunity to go buy a home or start a business from scratch. They're seeing their the wages from that job, but now they can have the benefits of an ownership stake in the business. And then for the local economy, employee-owned businesses are stronger, more profitable, more resilient. There's so many benefits to the stability, the strength, and the resiliency of the local economy if you're helping businesses transition to employee ownership. So it's really a triple win across workers, owners, and the local economy itself.
And maybe you could share an example of a business that you have helped successfully transition.
Yes, I can share one story, and we have a lot more stories on our website and can share other resources. If you want to find an employee-owned business in your community, they're probably out there. There's one business called Delta Pipeline, that story we've documented. It was a second generation family owned business. So they had values around being family owned, and yet there wasn't a natural succession to the next generation. And so the business owner was really thinking about what succession plan aligns with my values, and really saw the workforce as an extension of their family, and saw that transitioning to employee ownership helped him maintain the values and the customer relationships and kind of the brand identity and lots of different pieces that he built and the legacy that he wanted for that business. So now currently there are 68 team members of this manufacturing business that are now employee owners and seeing the benefits of employee ownership, and the business has never been stronger and continues in that community in a way that aligns with the owners kind of values.
I love that you talked about the owner's values, because that is something that can be really difficult when trying to decide what to do with your business. Because as you mentioned, they pour their heart into it. So from your perspective, it sounds like when you're in conversation with a business owner, if they don't have a family member to take it over and they really do value that family legacy, this seems like the next best thing.
Sure. I mean, obviously, owners are thinking about the financial piece. How can I get a good value for the business I've created? And there's so many other things that come into their decision: the timing of their exit, the pacing, the control they can maintain, and what the business looks like after they exit. And so, for a lot of those reasons, that's why some owners start gravitating towards this option versus others.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you mentioned obviously there's multiple services that you provide that do help businesses through this transition. Is there anything else you wanted to share on what that looks like?
Sure. I mean, we are here for any businesses that you know of in your community. You're welcome to join a call with our team if they want to explore this topic. But more than anything, me and my team are here for you as economic developers. If you want to think about how to train your BR&E team on employee ownership, how this might fit into the current conversations you're having with existing businesses in your community, or hosting an event for business owners, we will do that. We're here as a resource for free that you can tap into our expertise and provide training to your team or to the businesses in your community on this option. So feel free to reach out. We'd love to support you in bringing employee ownership to the businesses in your community.
Thank you for making that offer to everyone here. I highly encourage everyone to utilize their expertise. If you want to host a webinar for your own community or just train the folks that are on your team, I think that's an excellent way to start. And I thought I saw on your website that you offer some type of certification. Am I correct in that?
Yes, for business advisors like
Mm-hmm.
financial planners, CPAs in your community who may be looking for continuing education opportunities to maintain their license, we have accredited coursework that they can take on employee ownership, and would love to partner with you all to host a credit-worthy, webinar session workshop for CPAs, advisors, or other folks like that in your community. It can be a good carrot to get them there, and then something that could be beneficial for their clients.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. All right. Sam, we're going to move to you.
Great.
So financial planning. I mean, how do we plan for this, right? If you are a business owner, this feels like probably one of the scariest things that you will ever do. So what is the
Oh,
financial strategy? Where do you start?
yeah, for sure. No, I think that's really good, and it's really good for business owners to recognize this. And my name is Sam Brownell, and the firm where I work, Stratus Wealth Advisors, we We do have a financial planning asset management arm, but a big focus of our work is business valuation and succession planning. And the idea behind it is to try to keep independent businesses independent for all of the reasons that you, Bethany, and Sarah before were talking about, strengthen the community, important for the employees. But for the business owner in particular, most business owners are only going to transition once, and they're only going to have one transition that they go through. And so they've got to get it right, and that can be a lot of pressure. And so planning starts early. The earlier, the better, right? Running a business as if you are going to sell it is always a great way to do things. And that means that you're paying attention to the operations, developing a leadership pipeline, giving your employees opportunities for growth. All of these more qualitative things ultimately feed into that financial quantitative piece, which is what the owners are looking at, but you've got to build the right foundation to do that. And so from a business owner's perspective, making sure that they understand that there's a marriage between their personal and professional side. As small business owners, we can't get away from the fact that our business and our personal life are inextricably intertwined, to use a little tongue twister. But I do think that the planning has to start early. And the best thing that a business owner can do is to really look at the people in the business and make sure that they're developing them, because that lays the groundwork for any successful transition.
No, that's great. And for some of you that are on this webinar, you may have joined our succession planning webinar last year, where we reviewed some of the research that the University of Minnesota Extension conducted and their original data. And I just want to remind folks that one of the things that they found is that in businesses that did successfully transition, so they didn't shut down when the person retired, the majority of the time there was a financial planner involved. So I'm really glad that Sam's here to be able to lend that perspective, because that's unbiased data that really demonstrates the needs for business owners to have someone in their corner that they can really have that strategy conversation with. I think that's probably part of it, is just being able to bounce ideas off of you.
Yeah, right. And there's just so much going on out there, and there's lots of different advice, and you need to have somebody that you trust, whether it's a planner, a CPA, somebody. So one of us on this call, just get somebody in your corner who's going to have your best interest and the best interest of your company at heart, because most business owners care deeply about their company, their employees, their customers.
Yeah, so do you have any insight on how businesses can prepare financially to make the transition?
Yeah, so I would say that step number one is to know that it's going to happen, right? Your business is going to transition ownership, whether you plan for it or not. So it's generally better to plan for it, because then you can prepare to make sure that you're getting the financial benefit you need to help fund some of those post-ownership goals that you may have. Maybe it's going into a different line of work. Maybe it's spending more time with the grandkids. Maybe it's traveling, whatever that is. But starting early and trying to identify what you need from the business, what you need from your other assets, and how you're going to grow those. That planning is really, really important from a business owner's standpoint. And then I think when you're talking any transition, as Sarah alluded to, but particularly if it's an employee transition, this is where it's really, really important to start developing a leadership pipeline, start thinking about who that management is going to be, because we like to tell folks that just because you go employee ownership doesn't mean the laws of profit and loss go out the window. Right? These are businesses that are solid businesses that still have to run just like any other business. The ownership structure is just a little bit different. And so you need that next generation of talent to be developed. You need to be able to recruit and retain people that you want. And so that's really where you need to start, right? Leadership development and organizational resiliency.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you talk about resiliency. So my next question is, what are the financial risks and how can you mitigate them?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that in any business transition, there are risks, right? There are risks that you could have key people leave the organization. That's one of the big risks. You could have risks that customers might be shocked, and so there's communication that has to go on here. There are risks internally that maybe systems change, or the somebody brings in new ideas, new software, all these different types of things that could potentially change. But one of the benefits of an employee transfer is that you're selling the business to the people who know it best. And so the chances to make sure that continuity is as high as it can be are good, right? We don't like when a financial player, right, a private equity firm or somebody comes in, because their goal is not the business, it's not the workers, it's to maximize their own exit value in the next 3 to 5 years. And that's where you see a lot of change. You see downsizing, you see layoffs, you see movement to different technology products. So as you're thinking through how you can help folks and business owners in particular, this idea about continuity in an employee ownership transfer is really, really important to mitigate a lot of these risks of any ownership transition, particularly things around folks leaving, changes in processes, changes in systems. Just by selling to the people that know the business the best, that mitigates a lot of risk right there.
That makes sense. And obviously that's critical because long-term, a business owner wants their business to remain successful. The other question we have for you is, what role does tax planning play in the transition process? Obviously, if you're selling your business, you don't want to pay a huge tax bill that year.
Sure, sure. No, I mean it's really important, and so in any transition there are different competing forces, right? And you have to find the best compromise. And as Sarah talked about earlier, some of the way that you can transition to your employees, you don't necessarily need to do it all at once. You don't need to do it by your employees opening up their pockets. So tax planning works on both sides, right? There's the business side and there's the personal side for the owner. And so many of the transitions that we structure are over time, right? We go at 30% first, and then that might go another 20 or 30% down the line, and then a final amount, right? And that gives the owner a chance to get comfortable with the new structure. They take some risk off the table, but it also allows the owner to get comfortable that the employees can do this. And then we go to that next transition. But one of the nice things about these employee ownership transitions is that there are, particularly, if you start with an employee stock ownership plan, right, that's sort of the gold standard of tax planning, and there are lots of ways, both from the owner and the business, that can be very beneficial. It doesn't work for everybody. It's typically for larger size, more profitable companies, but there are tax benefits to the selling owner for deferring capital gains. There are tax benefits to the business depending on how it's structured going forward. And the employees then get shares in the company in a retirement plan, right? And those shares are growing tax deferred. Worker cooperative, you also, the owner has an opportunity to defer taxes on the sale, depending on how it's structured. And by definition, the way that a cooperative is set up, especially if it's a cooperative corporation, the patronage dividends that are returned, the profit sharing essentially returned to employees over time, member owners, right? That can also be deductible at the corporate level. So there are lots of things to think about. And then you look at the personal tax situation of the owner or the exiting owner. And again, this is where either you may be able to defer some capital gains. That's a little bit tricky, but selling over time, having a note, right? A lot of these are financed, and Mark will get into it a little bit more, but typically a bank isn't going to be able to finance the whole thing. So a selling owner is going to be a note holder here. And so getting paid out over time, adjusting how your compensation is paid to you, can all be ways that you as the owner can benefit and potentially lower the taxes, right? Long-term capital gains versus ordinary income. All of these things become very important to wealth creation and long-term planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I imagine that conversation is really needing to be had on an individual basis. So that's great that you brought that up, and it definitely speaks the need of having a financial planner, or as you said, a CPA involved from the very
Yeah,
beginning.
absolutely. Get the right team together, because like I said, you're only going to do this once. So you need to get the right team of people to help guide you through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up Mark. I'm excited to talk about how we fund this, right? Do you need to have cash? That seems like that's the biggest concern people have. Sarah mentioned it earlier, and I imagine that most employees don't have millions of dollars sitting in the bank in order to buy the business. So Mark, if you could introduce yourself and tell us how we pay for this.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Mark Fick. I'm at Shared Capital Cooperative. We are a small business loan fund based in Minnesota, but we work nationally. We can provide almost any kind of debt that a small business might need. But what makes us unique is we only work with cooperatively owned enterprises. So that could be a worker co-op, it could be a consumer co-op, a farmer co-op, as long as it's owned and operated on a cooperative business. And we actually are structured as a co-op ourselves. So we're owned by our borrowers and cooperatives that invest in us. So we know the co-op model inside and out and are obviously very attached to it. When I'm talking about conversions, I am talking specifically about conversions to worker cooperative ownership. So we don't do ESOPs. Those are great, but that's not part of our portfolio. And we do work with employee-owned like permanent trusts as well. So although that's sort of an evolving space and figuring that out as we go along. The short answer is, and we've done about 25, 26 transactions of converting businesses to worker ownership over the years. And in most cases, there is actually very little cash that's required of the individual workers and employees that are coming in to purchase the business. And that may seem a little jarring to folks because, we're starting up a business, you're taking ownership, you're taking control of this thing, you want to have some skin in the game, as they say. But that can really obviously be a hurdle. We're shifting ownership to a group of folks that don't necessarily have a lot of cash in their pocket historically and in current times. And that's part of our motivation, is to sort of help people build wealth as employees while sustaining this business. And so taking that into consideration, we expect very little for the transaction itself to come from the workers. And of course, as the business, assuming it is successful going forward, we want to see that the workers are benefiting from that. But that's not a normal underwriting standard for most banks. And we're a co-op, we're a CDFI, we're a mission-based lender. We're willing to take those risks because we understand the model and the importance of that model. That said, there are some occasions where we might be working with a more professional set of employees, a type of business that can pay out better than living wages, and those folks might have some cash in their pocket to take on to purchase a larger share. Essentially, what we're asking is employees to purchase that share in their business, and the question is, how big is that share? Some of these co-ops, that share might be just a couple $100s. Some businesses that are greater wealth producers and can pay higher wages, that share might be several $1,000s or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the situation. But ultimately, we're looking at the cash flow of the business to sustain the financing of this. As Sarah referenced, it's essentially kind of a leveraged buyout, and we're using the future earnings of the company to rely on to pay for the purchase of the company.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. I'm going to skip down to my last question and then go back up because I wanted to ask about collateral, because a lot of economic developers on this call, they're accustomed to working with an organization like the SBA, who would require, you have your own home or something that is you can put up as collateral. Is that something that you're seeing, or are these loans just strictly based on the future earnings of the business?
It is almost entirely based on the valuation of the business, the future earnings of the business. And again, that may make some more traditional small business lenders nervous. We found that it can work quite well. There are exceptions, kind of rare exceptions, when we might turn to a personal guarantee. But other than that, almost the entirety of our lending is done without personal guarantees. And part of that is we are then digging into, when we're doing our underwriting, we're looking at the financials, we're looking at the cash flow and the market and the capacity of the management, but we're also digging into that democracy, that decision-making of the new worker owners, and how effective are they? What kind of support do they have to make good decisions as a group? Some of our very small businesses, a small coffee shop or something like that, may have only a handful of workers. They may have a fairly flat structure and share in that decision-making. But as was kind of alluded to earlier as well, once you get to be a slightly larger business, there are fairly traditional management structures where decision-making has to move up and down the chain, more similar to where the business was before that. And so kind of mimicking that. We're looking at the group is the entity that we're underwriting, not the individual people.
That's really interesting. And it brings it full circle, I feel like, to what Sarah mentioned at the very beginning about working with businesses on feasibility and that planning. So when a group comes to you and they say, hey, we really want to buy this business, do they need to have all of that planning done? Or is that something that they can have a conversation? You can maybe direct them on what steps are required?
Yeah, they're probably going to need some support in figuring that out, and we can do some of that, but we don't have a formal kind of consulting arm of our organization, and that's why we often rely on partnerships with organizations like Project Equity to bring that, facilitating those conversations to the table. And we actually prefer that folks come to us early when it may still be in the ideas stage, just this is something we're exploring, because then we can walk along that path with them to better prepare them for what they will need when they start to actually ask for financing.
That's great. Now, I don't want to ask you something that is not in your comfort zone. So if it's not, please just tell me. But I guess could you maybe give people a little bit of insight on what they might expect to get as lending opportunities if they went to a normal bank?
Yeah, and some groups are able to use more traditional lenders for that, but then they have to assume that there are going to be personal guarantees. There may be a more rigorous traditional underwriting that doesn't account for the new dynamics of ownership going forward, simply because most banks aren't familiar with this. And that's a challenge for this sector in this space. There are more and more lenders who are stepping into this field and learning and understanding how to make this work. And we always appreciate new lenders coming into this space. But that means that you will probably have to do some shopping around and reach out to multiple places before you find a good fit for what you need from a lender.
Mm-hmm. And then another question would be, when you guys evaluate a deal, are there situations where you also ask the owner to carry some financing? I think Sam mentioned that as a possibility.
Yeah, when we look at sort of the most common sort of sources of financing for these transactions, we might be in sort of, I look across what we've done. Averages can be deceptive, but on average, we are maybe around 50 to 60% of the financing package.
Okay.
The rest of it is going to come from a combination of seller debt or seller earnout agreements. And so it kind of depends on the seller's situation. Do they need to, for whatever reason, step away quickly and be done with things, or are they going to stick around for a little bit? And it's actually very helpful to us, and it builds confidence for us when the seller is able to provide a note and or maybe negotiate some earnout opportunities over a 3 to 5 year period or something like that, because then we know that they have confidence in the business too, and they can help that transition by being some of that organizational memory and institutional memory and helping to transfer that over to the new owners over time.
That makes a lot of sense. In other words, they're not throwing the hot potato. They're actually staying there and they have incentive to do it.
Yeah. Yep. And that said, sometimes the owner, for whatever reason, needs to step away and there might be less seller involvement in the financing. The earnout option can be one way to address situations where there might be some tension around what that purchase price of that business is going to be. Depending on where the valuation is, the selling owner was sort of touched on before, they always see more value in this business than what a valuation might tell them or what the market might tell them, and might be hesitant to sell it for less. And so sometimes you have a note that is smaller than the amount and an earnout option that might be greater than the amount if the business is very successful. And that's one way to sort of get them comfortable with a price that sits in the middle somewhere between both sides of that transaction.
That makes sense. That's good insight. Thank you, Mark. Our final panelist, Don, you are going to be talking about the legal side. Do you need a lawyer? If so, why?
Asking a lawyer if you need a lawyer is a loaded question. The answer is yes.
Of course.
Hi, everybody. I'm Don Quinn. I'm with Quinn Patton, and we are a small business and employment law firm in Severna Park, Maryland. None of this constitutes legal advice, but I'm here to help as much as possible. So yes, you do need a lawyer. And I think all three of the panelists earlier touched on the fact that one of the most important things you can do is to plan and to have the right team in your corner. And for folks listening, these three folks that you've already heard from are great people to call.
Great. So let me ask, what are some of the legal structures that may be common for employee ownership transitions? We already talked about cooperatives, obviously, as being a great avenue, and ESOPs as well. Is there anything else that you're seeing?
So ESOPs are definitely the most common because of the employee owning the shares individually. It gives you far more flexibility. The other one that we do see is employee trusts, employee ownership trusts, EOTs, and you see worker cooperatives. Now, each of them come with their own structure. Each of them come with their own benefits, but also simultaneously, each of them come with their own pitfalls. And so that's where, when we talk about building a team early on, it is very important for an owner who wants to become a seller and basically keep the business in the working family to identify what structure works for them. And more importantly, and I think ironically, both Sam and Mark touched on this, very often you're dealing with an unsophisticated group of folks who aren't necessarily ready to jump into corporate governance. And so how you structure the transfer is going to be critically important.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think Sarah mentioned too at the beginning how your management and your governance might even be separate. So that was very interesting to me. I guess from the perspective of legal pitfalls, what could you put in place to help make sure that the governance remains strong and smooth after the transition?
Absolutely. And like Sarah said, employees are often not ready to take that jump, and you've got to like kind of structure it so that they are ready. But when you're talking about a smooth legal transition, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little on your questions here, one of the first things you need to do is realize that this takes time. Okay, you're not going to decide to retire today and sell it to the employees tomorrow. That's not how this works. You're looking at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. The more complicated you get, the more legal fees you want to pay, the longer it's going to last. So just keep that in mind as you're starting to plan and you're advising people on transitioning. Things to do as you're starting to enter that planning phase is to do, and this came up earlier, a professional business valuation, because very often, I've put 25 years into this business. I think it's worth $500 million. It's really not. Okay. And that's a conversation you need to be having with your advisors and with your team. Your legal documents. I work with small business owners every day. I am a small business owner. We are terrible at keeping corporate governance. Okay. We are awful at it. We don't keep our LLC up to date. We don't do our meetings regularly. And we see this. But the problem is, when you're starting to transition, you have to develop that level of sophistication. Because whether you're going out to get a non-traditional type loan, or you're needing to meet ERISA law, or you're needing to make sure that your LLC docs are correct, those I's have to be dotted, those T's have to be crossed. And so as you're going through it, these are the pitfalls, especially on the legal side. What is your effective stakeholder management strategy? How are you going to run the company? Is there a trust involved? Who's the trustee? What is the rules around how the trustee manages your company once you no longer have control? And those are the things that people end up in conflicts because they don't plan, and then you fail.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting about what you just said is that sometimes the planning maybe needs to start with making sure your current ducks are in a row, that all of your current licenses and all of your filings are accurate and up to date. I know there's plenty of situations where a business owner, and it makes sense, right? They're really, really busy just running day to day. They might not even realize something as simple as their business license lapsed, right? You need to go sell your business. You need to have that package fully in place. So I guess what recommendations do you have for economic developers as they're approaching these conversations with business owners, how they can maybe help guide them to make sure that's in place?
Well, the very first thing I would do was say, when was the last time you talked to your lawyer? That's always going to be my first advice. Secondly, is your business licenses up to speed? What is the structure of the organization as it stands? Most business owners forget that there are legal requirements to keep your business in compliance. It's really easy to put an LLC in place and then forget, we don't need annual meetings. Why do we need annual meetings? Well, you need annual meetings because that's a requirement. You need those minute notes. We made a decision. We decided to sell. Well, did you talk to the shareholders and decide to sell? Is it you and your wife, or you and your husband? These are conversations that need to be had to remind people. Now, most people know this stuff because they've run a business successfully for many years, but it's easy to forget when you're running the day-to-day operations. And I think the first conversations need to be, A, are you in compliance with all the legal requirements? B, how do you want to structure this sale? And C, what do you really want to get out of this? And finally, I think the most important question is, what's your time frame? Because that becomes a huge sticking point for people.
Yeah, and really, every single panelist has talked about what has to happen in preparation today at a very high level, right? Because we only want to take 45 minutes of your time on this call today. But the reality is that just that planning in advance and the feasibility pieces that come into this might take a year, right? I mean, it could potentially even take longer, but I would not be an unreasonable expectation to think that it would take a year to get all of your advisors together and make sure that you work through this. And because of that, obviously, as economic developers and community leaders, the best thing we can do is to ask questions on those BR&E visits and to put out maybe webinars like this for people who are considering, do you want to sell your business? If so, what's your time frame? And obviously, if they say their time frame is less than a year, it's really important as leaders for us to gather a group like this, a group of experts, to maybe have a meeting with that business owner and really lay out what needs to happen quickly and really how to chart out the priorities to make sure that you don't end up in a spot like I've heard, unfortunately, so many times where someone closes their doors and they didn't have to, right? If they had just had a team together to help walk them through this process. So I know we don't have a lot of time left. I do want to just open these up to any of our panelists in case there's something lingering you wanted to address. Here are some questions we can go over, or if there's anything that you just want to share with folks as a takeaway.
I'll share two quick things. First, I know this is a lot of content, and as economic developers, you don't have to be experts. I hope what you've gathered today is that there is a team of folks, both nationally and likely in your community, that can help support this conversation. Your job, I hope you're excited to just start the conversation about employee ownership with businesses in your community. And I think it's also worth noting that this is a strategy for economic development organizations that is not partisan or political or aligns with one value set or another. We've worked in communities across the US that see the value of this, and business owners across different kind of value sets, whether you're about your legacy, your workforce, your family, you're retaining your business. There's a lot of reasons this can be a solution. So we're here to help any communities, any business owners align this strategy with their own values.
And
Thanks, Sarah.
I'll just add something real quick, just to sort of expand on both Mark and Don touched on it, is the timing and the starting early. We always say 3 to 5 years is at a very minimum, because
Ouch, Sam, you took my year and made it longer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It takes time, right? And business owners are busy, and you're working with somebody and all of a sudden they go radio silent for 6 months. Well, that may not be because they're not interested in moving forward. It may be because they're trying to expand the product line, or they're going into a new market. And so as economic developers and folks that are sitting there, try to counsel folks that 1 year is incredibly quick. And it's typically not going to happen, and setting expectations is really important.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe just a couple of high-level thoughts. One is that it's important to remember that converting a business to employee ownership is not a strategy for saving a failing business or turning around a failing business. This works when businesses are successful and at least doing reasonably well and have a future in that sector. So every once in a while, we get that call saying, hey, this thing's not working well. I want to sell it to my employees. And so we want to run away from that concept. Another thing is sort of kind of touching back to what was mentioned at the beginning about people are using this as a way to sustain economic development in small towns and rural communities and places where there may not be bigger economic engines to save that one hardware store or that one grocery store. And I feel like one way to frame this for folks, because it can seem like a strange thing, an odd thing to explore, oh, that's too far afield, is really what we're doing is we're taking that spirit of community and healthy community and connections and interactions that we value a lot, and codifying it into a business model. Because we have great neighborhood relationships. We love these small businesses. And what we're doing is we're just shifting that so we know that that business will always be a part of this healthy community ecosystem. And I think that's one way to kind of frame it for the cities and towns and municipalities that you work with.
I love that framing, Mark. That's really spot on. All right. Well, again, we just thank everyone for being here today. Audrey is going to send out the recording and links to our panelists' websites so you can learn more about what they do and how they can be of assistance to you. Again, there may also be a lot of people in your own communities that can be of assistance. But the bottom line is we're all here for the same reason, and that's to keep our community strong. And one of the ways we can do that is by keeping businesses local. So thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate your time. And thank you to all of our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah.
you all.
Did you get what you wanted out of that?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think all
Excellent.
Yeah,
guests are here.
and Bethany, we're honest about being a resource. If folks, if you get questions, I'm happy for you to share my contact information and follow up with anybody if they need more info.
Thank you. I did not want to publicly offer to give your email address, which is why I offered the website. But thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, do it if you want.
Yeah,
happy to talk
absolutely.
to them.
Us as well. We're happy to help.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam. All right. Well, I really appreciate you guys being here today. Have a wonderful day. Thank you again. And Audrey will follow up with you after this.
Sounds good.
All right, take care,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.